If you were an American tanker in 1945, there was one sound that could freeze your blood faster than enemy artillery, or the roar of another tank's engine. It wasn't a cannon blast. It wasn't the screech of incoming shells. It was a dull whoosh, followed by silence, because that sound often meant a single infantryman, hidden somewhere you couldn't see, had just fired a cheap metal tube at your tank, and in a fraction of a second your steel armor, your crew, and your chances of survival could vanish in fire. By the end of World War II, these disposable weapons destroyed more Allied tanks than Germany's famous Tigers and Panthers combined. Not massive war machines, not elite armored units, just ordinary soldiers with something simple, cheap, and terrifyingly effective. So how did the Germans create one of the deadliest infantry weapons in history? And why did it take so many bizarre, sometimes absurd failures before they finally got it right? To understand that, we have to rewind to a time when tanks weren't supposed to be unstoppable. When World War II began in 1939, tank armor was still relatively thin. In many cases, it was barely enough to stop machine gun fire, and sometimes not even that. The weapons designed to kill tanks hadn't changed much since the First World War. Anti-tank rifles and small-towed guns were considered more than sufficient. Nobody felt an urgent need to reinvent the wheel. Germany relied heavily on the 37mm anti-tank gun. It was light, easy to move, cheap to produce, and against the tanks of the late 1930s, it worked just fine. German doctrine assumed speed, maneuver, and combined arms would handle anything the enemy fielded. Then, in 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union, and reality hit hard. Out of the dust and smoke rolled the T-34 and the KV-1. These tanks were a shock. Sloped armor, thick steel, powerful guns. Suddenly, the trusted 37mm shells bounced harmlessly off Soviet hulls. German soldiers joked bitterly that their anti-tank gun was now just a door knocker. You could hit a T-34 dead on, and all you'd do was announce your presence. The problem wasn't ignorance. The Germans' new armor was getting better. Before the war even started, they were already developing 50 and 75mm anti-tank guns. But production takes time. Deployment takes time. Training takes time. And on the Eastern Front, German infantry didn't have time. Anti-tank rifles weren't the answer either. These oversized rifles fired powerful, armor-piercing rounds and had been effective earlier in the war. Soviet 14.5mm anti-tank rifles were dangerous enough that German crews started welding improvised side skirts onto their tanks, hoping incoming rounds would tumble instead of penetrate. But as armor grew thicker, rifles simply couldn't keep up. Physics doesn't negotiate. There were also magnetic charges and anti-tank mines, but using them required something close to suicidal bravery. A soldier had to run up to a moving tank, climb onto it, and physically attach the explosive. In real combat, that usually ended exactly how you'd expect. What every army needed was something new. A weapon light enough for infantry to carry, cheap enough to mass-produce, simple enough that barely trained soldiers could use it, and powerful enough to kill a modern tank from a realistic distance. Not across a battlefield, but not point-blank either. Somewhere in between, the answer, everyone realized, was the shaped charge. Unlike a conventional explosive that blasts outward in every direction, A shaped charge focuses its energy into a narrow jet of superheated metal. When it hits armor, that jet burns straight through, spraying molten fragments into the crew compartment. It doesn't rely on speed or mass. It relies on chemistry and geometry. The warhead itself wasn't the hard part. Multiple nations understood the theory. The real challenge was delivering that warhead accurately, safely, and reliably using something a normal infantryman could actually fire. This is where things got strange. Before anyone found the right solution, there were many wrong ones. Some were clever but flawed. Others bordered on madness. And all of them showed just how desperate armies were to solve this problem. The Germans, never shy about unconventional engineering, tried one of the simplest ideas imaginable: throw the weapon by hand. The Panzerwerf mine, literally anti-tank throwing mine, was essentially a shaped charge football. A soldier would throw it at a tank, and if it landed at the correct angle, the charge would detonate and penetrate the armor. On paper, it worked. In reality, it weighed about 3 pounds. Most soldiers couldn't throw it very far. Worse, the explosion's lethal radius was often greater than the distance the soldier could throw it accurately. So you'd throw the mine and immediately dive for cover, hoping you weren't about to be killed by your own weapon. And if a tank was close enough for you to throw something at it, things were already going very badly. So someone had another idea. Don't throw it. Launch it. The Germans mounted shaped charge grenades onto flare guns. Load a blank cartridge, pull the trigger, and the grenade would fly toward the target. Clever in theory. In practice, the recoil was so violent they had to add a stock just to keep the weapon usable. Accuracy was poor, range was limited, but the shaped charge worked, and that kept the concept alive. Next came rifle grenades. Attach the grenade to the muzzle of a standard infantry rifle, fire a blank, and send the warhead downrange. Britain, Germany, and the United States all developed versions. Range improved, sometimes up to 100 meters, but recoil was brutal, accuracy was questionable, and hitting a moving tank while under fire was easier said than done. The Germans even tried giving their obsolete 37mm guns a second life by mounting massive shaped charge grenades on the muzzle. The steel granite 41 could penetrate modern armor, but it defeated the whole purpose. You still had to drag a cannon around. Across the channel, the British took a completely different path. Their weapon, the PIA-T projector, infantry, anti-tank, didn't use rockets at all. It used a massive spring-powered spigot. Pull the trigger, the rod slammed forward, struck the grenade, and launched it toward the target. Its biggest advantage? No backblast. You could fire a PIA-T from inside buildings or trenches without giving away your position in a massive fireball. But the downsides were brutal. It weighed over 30 pounds. The recoil could knock the wind out of you. And if the automatic recocking failed, the soldier had to stand up, brace the weapon against the ground, and manually reset the spring. While under fire, to make matters worse, roughly a quarter of the grenades were duds. Imagine lining up the perfect shot, pulling the trigger, and watching the grenade bounce harmlessly off a tank. British troops both loved and hated the PIA-T. The Americans, meanwhile, stumbled onto the future. The M1 bazooka entered combat in 1942. It was the first widely issued rocket-propelled infantry anti-tank weapon. Light, portable, Effective. A two-man team could threaten enemy armor from up to 150 meters away. But early models used batteries to ignite the rocket. And batteries don't like cold. In European winters, bazookas sometimes refused to fire when soldiers needed them most. Later designs fixed the issue, but the reputation stuck. The Soviets, surprisingly, never fielded their own equivalent during most of the war. They relied on anti-tank rifles, Molotov cocktails, and close-range explosives, dangerous, brutal methods. When they captured German weapons, they used them eagerly. By 1943, everyone understood the problem. The shaped charge worked, but the delivery system still wasn't right. Then the Germans stopped overthinking it. The Panzerfaust wasn't elegant. It wasn't sophisticated. And that was exactly the point. It was a single-shot, disposable launcher with a preloaded warhead. No moving parts, no batteries, no complicated sights. A soldier rested it on his shoulder, flipped up a simple sight, and pulled the trigger. Black powder launched the warhead forward. The blast vented out the back, canceling recoil. The result was a weapon with almost no kick, but a deadly backblast. Anyone standing behind it could be burned or killed. The Germans painted warning labels on the tube for a reason. The warhead itself was devastating. Depending on the model, it could penetrate up to 200 millimeters of armor, enough to kill any Allied tank of the time. The downside was range. The first Panzerfaust was effective at just 30 meters. That's close, dangerously close. And the projectile flew in a high arc, making moving targets hard to hit. But it was cheap, light, and terrifyingly effective. By 1944, Panzerfausts were everywhere. German infantry formed tank hunter teams, ambushing armor in cities, forests, and hedgerows. One soldier could destroy a tank worth hundreds of times more than the weapon he carried. In the final phase of the war, roughly 70% of Soviet tank losses came not from German tanks or heavy guns, but from Panzerfausts. In Normandy, a third of Allied tank losses were caused by these weapons. Crews welded anything they could onto their vehicles: sandbags, spare tracks, wire mesh, even bed frames. The goal was simple: make the shaped charge detonate early. Urban combat became a nightmare. Tanks refused to advance without infantry. Every window was a threat. Every corner a potential ambush. And the Panzerfaust kept evolving, from the 30-meter models to the widely produced Panzerfaust 60, to the massive 100-meter and experimental 150-meter versions. Each iteration pushed range and lethality further. By 1945, even untrained civilians in the Volkssturm could use them effectively. Teenagers and old men fought tanks in the ruins of Berlin, and sometimes won. After the war, the Soviets studied everything. German engineers were interrogated. Designs were copied. In 1949, the RPG-2 appeared. The resemblance was no accident. From there, the evolution never stopped. Modern weapons like the RPG-7, Javelin, and NLAW trace their lineage directly back to those desperate German experiments. What began as crude metal tubes became the most dangerous threat tanks have ever faced.